The most prestigious comic book collections in the world can earn a pedigree. But what does it take to become a Pedigree Comics collection? That's what I'm going to explain to you today, as well as share with you the stories behind some of these rare collections. Stories that have built some of the largest comic book stores in the world. Stories that go behind the scenes at internment camps. Stories that involve actual serial killers. Without any further ado, let's talk about Pedigree Comics collections. Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Today, we're going to be delving into the collecting aspect of the comic book hobby. Now, personally, while I have a decent enough collection, I really focus more on just the reading and appreciating the storytelling and the art, but I totally respect the fact that some people really enjoy looking for key issues or some sort of a special run. Now, the rarest of comic book collections are ones that earn the title of a Pedigree Collection. This is going to be more of a story time episode. What I'm going to do today, it's going to be a lot more casual. Not super fast. In fact, there's probably going to be a few cuts while I'm just talking to you. And I'll do a lot of this as well, because I know people like depth when they watch YouTube videos. No, so grab a blanket, lay down, grab something like tea. This is going to be chill. I'm going to talk to you first about what it takes to become a Pedigree collection, which also explains why they're so rare. And then I'm going to tell you some of the stories behind some famous ones. Okay? So, like I say, casual, let's get into it. It's generally going to be accepted that you need three things to become a Pedigree collection. And the first is certainly the overall quality. It has to be very high. For Golden Age comics, that's going to mean at least an 8.0 on the grading scale. For Silver Age, we're going to be starting at like a 9.0, but if it's 1965 or newer, 9.4. There may be an exception here or there on a single book within a collection, but generally, we're talking very high quality for the comics. Number two, we're going to need some sort of an origin story, to put it in comic book terms, of where this collection came from. It can't just be a collection of cool issues. Like, I can't go on eBay, spend whatever I want to get the whole run of the original Ninja Turtles run and say that's eligible for a pedigree. Instead, you're going to need what auction houses would call provenance, where you know the full history. One person got them brand new off the newsstand, and then maybe you can identify it with special markings. For instance, some stores might use a grease pencil or a date stamp, something like that on the cover or an interior page that lets us know this all came from one place. Or it was sold as a lot or a couple lots, and we just know the history. Obviously, it would be very easy for some of those things to be missing, and that helps explain why there are so few Pedigree comic collections. And then three, tres, or letter C, whatever you prefer. We're going to need completeness. By that I mean it needs to be a lengthy run on an important title, or maybe just something that makes it unique. For instance, maybe it's all number ones for a bunch of key Golden Age issues. A lot of times this will mean that the collection itself is pretty large. Most of them will be over 1,000 issues. There are a small handful that are just over 100 issues, but they're even more rare. You know, a lot of pristine Golden Age items. And when I say rare, the CGC, or the Certified Guarantee Company, only acknowledges 61 Pedigree collections. Worldwide, that's obviously very, very few. But then again, who even gets to call something a Pedigree collection? Pedigree collections used to be even more rare, and they would be known by big retailers, or they would be seen at certain comic conventions in the earlier days. By the year 2000, the Certified Guarantee Company, CGC, began grading and slabbing books, and it did become the industry leader. I think most people watching this have heard of the CGC. At this point, by default, we kind of take the CGC's 61 Pedigree comics to be authorized Pedigree collections. It's always possible another newer discovery could emerge, but there haven't really been any big discoveries since the 1990s. It's just going to become more and more unlikely that stuff from like the 1940s and 50s has been preserved in fantastic condition and that it has a bunch of key issues. You know, it's just, it takes a lot of factors to be a Pedigree collection. Before 2019, CGC would just sort of put a notation on the label, but ever since 2019, if they grade a book now that's a Pedigree collection, they'll put a gold label on the top. So that's a fairly easy way to identify it. And even other competing grading companies like the CBCS, I know is one, they will acknowledge pedigrees, but they're going to need some of the provenance to prove that it came from a Pedigree collection before they notate that on their labels. Very few of these exist. We're mostly looking at the CGC to say, yes, this actually came from a known Pedigree collection. And there are amazing collections out there that are still being discovered. I'll give you an example. Last year, musician Ian Briggs decided that he was going to sell off his massive comic book collection. We are talking over 40,000 comics. They're going to auction at Sotheby's. What he did was get one of every single issue DC Comics ever published. Huge collection, fantastic condition. He wasn't buying them brand new off the newsstand since, 1938 with Action Comics #1. So it's really unlikely that this will earn a pedigree. Instead, I think it will just be graded. It will get named. It'll be a named collection, a little more common than pedigree. Let's talk about some of the stories of actual pedigree comics. I'm sitting back, taking it easy here. The first collection I want to talk to you about is what's known as either the Edgar Church or the Mile High Comics Collection. And as you may have guessed with that name, yes, it has to do with Mile High Comics. That's a store in the Denver area, or chain of stores really, run by a guy named Chuck Rozanski. He was the guy that found Edgar Church's collection. Let me get into that because this is a story that all of us kind of dream of. Basically, stumbling upon an amazing comics collection and getting to buy it for very, very little. That's what happened here. Chuck Rozanski. He started Mile High Comics back in 1969. He was just 17 years old. He was basically running it out of his basement. He went to college for a few years, dropped out in, I believe, 1974 because his comic book stores were doing well. Mile High Comics had 3 stores at that point, doing very well. 1977 comes along. Chuck's at work, gets a call from a friend who runs a bookstore in the Boulder, Colorado area. He says something along the lines of, "Hey Chuck, had a family reach out to me. They basically want to sell off a large comics collection that one of their heirs has put together. They just want to, sell it. They're looking for somebody to buy it. They reached out to me, not my thing. Are you interested?" And Chuck decides, you know what? Yeah, I'll take that chance. A lot of people will call, say that they've got a big collection. Maybe it's not big, or maybe it's just kind of not in good shape, but he decides to take the chance. And this is basically what made his career. Goes out to this house and meets the realtor. The family isn't there. And the realtor's like, yeah. So the family basically is looking to sell this home, but first they need to clear it out. There's a large comics collection here. You want to take a look, see if it's something you want to make an offer on. He's like, yeah, I'll take a look. So he starts going down into the basement and he sees stacks of comics about 100 high. And as he gets down the stairs, he sees more and more of these stacks. He realizes there's like 60 of these stacks, very well preserved. He gets more excited as he looks at them. Perfect condition, really, really good. And he's like, what's the deal? And they're like, look, we don't really even care what you offer. The important thing is we want it out of here ASAP and we want to sell it all. And Chuck's like, can you take payments? They're like, no, we don't want to deal with that. Can I sell them consignment style at one of my stores? No, we want cash. We just want to sell it and we want cash and we want to be done with it. And you have to agree to take everything in the closet. He's like, the closet? Yeah, there's a closet in the back. Lots more comics. Oh, okay. He goes back there. He opens this cedar-lined closet. Comics stacked from floor to ceiling, but immaculate, all really nice. And he starts going through them and they're like, hey, this is some stuff from the 40s and the 50s. And he starts getting more excited because now he starts seeing key issues. He sees things like Action Comics #1. Oh my God, this is the find of a lifetime. Yes, I'll buy it, he says. Doesn't know how he's going to pay for it all yet. He can only take, some of it in his van right there. He just loads the thing up over 2 hours and he's barely made a dent. And the family's like, well, no, you can't come back tonight. In a week. You can come back next weekend. He's like, oh my God. All right. He thinks about it and he goes, you know what I'll do? Here's how I'll pay for it. I grabbed a few keys here. I'm going to call up my best customer, offer him some of these comics to get some capital. Guy goes for it. Now he's got the capital. Now Chuck buys the entire collection, just loads up his van, fills up his apartment with super valuable comics. And now he's able to really just give a turbo boost to his business. He sells a bunch of these valuable comics to fund his business. For instance, he sold about 1,800 really amazing issues to another store owner who was getting ready to retire. And in exchange, Chuck got his store and about 100,000 back issues. Wow. All right. Then in the 80s, Chuck sells a bunch more key issues, including Batman #1, so that he's got $21,000 to buy ad space in Marvel Comics. And for 9 months straight, the center 2 pages in Marvel would have ads for the Mile High Comics mail order catalog. Chuck estimates that $21,000 that he spent earned him back at least $100,000. It made his career. Just an amazing story of somebody coming across these comics and finding a way to buy them and really just build a store. And if you've ever looked up Mile High Comics, they have an absolutely massive warehouse in Colorado. A lot of it is roped off because they sell this stuff online now, and it's that's the online side of the business, but you can still browse around. And I've heard that it's almost like a museum and that the back issues can be priced pretty high because they're not necessarily looking to sell them to individuals that walk into the store anymore. I hear that they more want to do business online. Hey, whatever. The guy built an incredible business off of essentially one massive collection. And here's the thing. Chuck found out he wasn't even the first comic book store that got reached out to. Another guy got the opportunity and passed. But who was Edgar Church? Who was this guy that amassed this massive collection of all these valuable comics? Well, turns out the guy was basically a freelance graphic designer. Not necessarily the wealthiest guy in the world. He did fine. He did ads for companies in the Yellow Pages, things like that, the local Yellow Pages. That's how we used to look up phone numbers back in the day. He had an agreement with his local newsstand to pull one copy of every comic, starting with something like Action Comics #1 from 1938. So from 1938 through, something like 1955, Edgar Church got one of every single comic that hit that newsstand. And then he, of course, kept it in conditions that were just ideal. Consistent, dry Colorado air, not really humid or anything like that. Cedar-lined closet, kept a lot of the bugs away and everything. One of the best kept collections at the time. Just incredible. There's a lot of Pedigree Comics collections that have happy stories. Don Rosa, really famous artist on Scrooge McDuck. He kept a large collection the whole time he was working as a professional, and then one day decided to sell pretty much his entire collection off, and that's known as the Don Rosa collection. Good for him. He got his enjoyment out of it, and he got a nice chunk of change as he neared retirement. There's the Haight Ashbury pedigree. I find that one interesting because it's full of rare underground comics, tons and tons of underground comics, a portion of collecting that doesn't always get represented as much, Perhaps that benefits its outsider status. Plenty of happy stories. I'm going to talk to you about a dark comic book collection. It's called the Green River Collection. And if you know what Green River refers to, yeah, there was a serial killer that was known as the Green River Killer. This is sort of connected to that. The Green River Pedigree Collection contains between 1,600 to 2,400 comics. I'll explain that discrepancy in a little while. And it was collected by a pair of brothers, Robert and William Stevens. They're out in Spokane, Washington, where their father owns a pharmacy. So they basically grabbed one of every comic that came through the pharmacy newsstand. It meant that this collection has a lot of Silver Age, a lot of superhero stuff, a lot of Marvel and DC stuff, large runs, great condition, and lots of key issues within that. The reason for the two different numbers. In the mid-'80s, William decides to sell about 800 of those comics. He passed away in 1991, and his lawyer that was managing his estate sells off the remaining about 1,650, give or take. So that's why there's sort of two different numbers, as they were sold in two different lots. But they're fairly well identifiable, even as two separate lots, because they were all like stamped with a date stamp by that pharmacy. So they sort of have the same markings. There's probably some that have fallen through the cracks, if I'm being honest. I mean, it was sold as two lots, but it's very easy for either of those two people to have sold a couple pieces. That's still known as one collection, but what's the story behind it, right? So William, he goes by Bill. The guy, as he grows up, ends up being not a great person. At one point, he goes to jail at a minimum security facility, and no one's looking, so he just casually walks out, and then he's on the run for a long time from the authorities. Between 1982 and 1984, all of a sudden, all of these women are getting killed by a serial killer in the Seattle area, and the bodies get dumped in the Green River. Green River Killer. Bill was one of the suspects at the time. Now, he gets cleared. And I said that he passed away in 1991. I think it was 2001. Police finally catch the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. However, is there a possibility that Bill did something evil and, it's not all accounted for? I feel like it's possible. First of all, he definitely said plenty of dark things to his brother growing up, that he wanted to do horrible things to women. I'm not going into the specifics. That's not what this is about. One of the victims, for some reason, he had her ID at his house. That's what made him a suspect initially. Why did he have that? Well, they could never prove that he killed her, but I'm just saying, to me, there are still question marks. A massive comics collection that was put together by a not great guy. Side note, tangential, but sort of related. If you're interested in the Green River Killer, there is a fantastic comic book, nonfiction, about it. It's written by the son of the detective that actually got Gary Ridgway to confess. Art by Jonathan Case. Really captivating nonfiction book. So I told you the darkest story here, and I'd love to swing back to just a super happy story. Instead, I'm gonna pivot and share with you one that's sort of dark, but not as dark as serial killers. We're gonna talk about a collection that was put together by a girl who had to live in the U.S. internment camps that we set up for our own citizens during World War II. This collection is called the Okajima Collection. And lots of Golden Age stuff, mostly superhero actually, which is just sort of weird because so many of these covers were really anti-Japanese. We're going into World War II, we considered them the enemy. Now, that was put together by a girl named Fumika Okajima, who apparently was into comic books. Very cool. Great collection. Lots of Golden Age stuff. Lots of Golden Age superhero stuff. 1942. Specifically, I'll say February of 1942. FDR, President Roosevelt, enacts one of the saddest pieces of American history. Signs a bill that calls for Japanese American citizens to be sent to internment camps. It's concerned that maybe they were spies or something like that. Terrible piece of history. The Okajima family goes to live at one of these camps in New Mexico, and Fumiko not only was able to keep her collection, she actually kept up with her collection. There were still, newsstands and stuff on these in these camps. She does that, and gets out in 1943, goes to live with her sister in Chicago, keeps buying comics, moves to California, gets married, and I think sometime shortly after she gets married in like the mid-50s, she finally stops buying comics and sells them off. But a lot of those comics have notations in that inside that identify it as coming from the Okajima collection. But did Fumiko, also sometimes known as Betty, did she really put together this collection? There's always been some discussion about that within the circles of collectors that really love to delve into that provenance behind these pedigree collections. There are some inconsistencies. The timeline, like getting some of these comics that are stamped as being in the camp after she supposedly got out of camp, that doesn't quite make sense. A few other things, like how did this collection actually come to be? I'm doing the research for this episode, and I came across an amazing video. I can't do better than this, and I don't want to just recap everything that this other YouTuber did. So, in the link below, I am going to link you to Karen's Pages. This is a YouTube channel that has an hour-long video where she investigates the history of the Okajima Collection. And this is more what I want to talk about, the interest in pedigree comics, how there's always a history and an origin behind them. And the host does an incredible job, in my opinion, with the research. Great story where she uncovers who, in her opinion, really assembled the collection. And it doesn't really invalidate the story that I've already shared with you, but let's just say there are some wrinkles and some twists and turns to that story of who actually put it together. Was it really Fumiko Okajima, or were there other Okajimas out there that maybe one of them put it together? Well, I'm hinting towards what it is, but it's a big story, as you could tell. An hour-long video. I really recommend watching that video by Karen's Pages. I found it really interesting. Not for everybody, but for those of us that love comics and love the stories behind the comics, I think that that's a really cool place to start. If you're just curious in general, what about all the other collections out there? Like I say, there are 61 that are acknowledged by CGC, and they have that on their website. You can scroll down and they've got little sort of quick snippets explaining what each collection is. And from there, if you find one of those stories a little interesting, you can delve into it, and there's a lot of discussion for every single collection out there. Probably some videos as well. An interesting rabbit hole to fall down, and I thought it would be fun to aim you at that hole. Because if there's anything that I can do as host, it's to help my viewers fall down a hole. Happy to do it. No, I would love to hear in the comments below, do you collect comics and get them graded by any chance? If you do, have you ever bought or at least come across a Pedigree Comics Collection book? I'd be very interested to hear about that. I've never looked for them. I didn't really know about them until somewhat recently. I can tell you that now when I go to comic conventions, I'm going to be looking to see if I can find an example of a Pedigree Collection book. Just absolutely fascinates me. Thank you so much for watching. I've got some great episodes coming up for the summer. Hey, we've got the Wolverine Deadpool movie. I should probably do something about Deadpool. Never really talked about him as a character too much. It's the summer. This seems like a good opportunity for me to finally talk about the Jaws manga that I took years and years, really decades, to find. I would love to talk about that with you all. Very much a summer story. So I've got some fun stuff planned this summer. I hope you'll consider watching. And also, I've got my second channel called Pros and Cons. And on that channel, I do a weekly recap of the comic book news, as well as little reviews of the comics that came out that past week. Sometimes I'll have a guest on for a short interview. And on that channel, I also will look at some indie comics that either get mailed to me or that people want to talk about online. Finally, on Pros and Cons, it's a mix, a hodgepodge of comic book material, unlike this channel that's a little more focused. Jim Mafood, great comic book artist, right? Well, he and I do a show every 2 weeks or so called Trash Movie Bonanza, where we look at some bad movies or movies that underperformed or are cult hits. And our latest collaboration, we decided to look at comic book movies, Marvel versus DC. Howard the Duck, Swamp Thing, both have a reputation. That'll be coming out really soon. Thank you for listening to me. I can't wait to see you. I'll be back as soon as I can. Thanks, everybody. Keep reading comics. Really appreciate you watching. Appreciate the comments. Appreciate the likes, the subscribes. When you hit the notification bell, that stuff all helps the algorithm. So thank you. Introduces the show to new people. Thank you to the people on both Patreon and YouTube that support the show. I always say it, I couldn't do it without your support. It wouldn't be financially viable. There's not that many ads being offered, and I was already super picky about what I do as an ad. So YouTube doesn't pay a whole lot. I couldn't do this without my supporters. So if you're in a position to even donate $1 a month, it adds up. It means a lot to me. It means I can keep creating content that excites me and hopefully you find interesting too. But this was fun for me to look into Pedigree Comics collections because it shows me that so many different types of people collect comics. When I looked at these 61 collections, it went across age, race, gender, class, all sorts of people. All sorts of people, all collecting comics. And to me, that shows me that storytelling and art, those are mediums that we all love, and it brings us together. We can have differences, but we also have a lot in common, and I like to emphasize that stuff. So I find it kind of beautiful that so many different types of people have collected these amazing, amazing collections. What I wouldn't give to, honestly, just look at one of these. If it was ever at an auction house and they had a preview night or a comic convention, if they ever had, a special, curated collection just to look at, I would love that. There used to be a comic book museum in Baltimore, Maryland. Steve Jeppy ran. Boy, that thing was gorgeous. I really would love another comic book museum. I'm rambling. I'm going to take off. Thanks for watching. Hey, you!